Good afternoon. I'm going to be very brief. I was telling the chairperson that I would use this opportunity just to introduce the concept of green bond and the context of biodiversity and the kind of challenges which we face if we want to operationalize, escalate this concept of raising finances and improving our status on biodiversity, and then do more substantive discussions in the work groups, which I think will be more practical given the time constraint. First, the concept about the green bonds. And the bonds as an instrument, all of us know, has been there for years in the market. In fact, in IL&FS, we raised the first municipal bond in the city of Ahmedabad years ago. And this experiment actually was one of the first one in the country and in the Asian region. And we got a very good success in raising funds for the improvement of the city of Ahmedabad, drawing funds through bonds. Bonds has been an interesting product always because it is judged as relatively low risk. It has a fixed income structure. And when it comes to environmental and social concerns or interests, people have found it's easy to integrate without major risks. And once you integrate it, people also have found that the investments made are effective. And if we are using this term, sustainable investments in some sense, bonds, when well structured with the environmental, social interests, do realize on the ground level such benefits. And you in fact enjoy very good ratings for some of these bonds who have performed very well because they have centered in their project concepts and designs and operations sustainability as the core. Of course, one of the interests with the concept of green bonds specifically came about was not just that we needed a huge pool of resources, financial resources, to meet the challenges at the global scale on sustainability, especially when you do see sustainability interests pretty skewed across the countries. And then the whole resource flows, the way they are happening today, are also getting further skewed. Multilateral financing institutions such as the World Bank came up with this concept that can we not respond to these challenges, at the apex being that of the global warming or climate change, and come up with a strategic framework where we use green bonds as a mechanism to raise finance, especially to complement the limited resources governments have today. So the idea was really to tap into a larger global pool of assets, in the direction of fixed income investments. And at that point of time, there were substantive resources available from the pension funds and the sovereign wealth funds. And the idea was to tap these and come in the form of a product which recognizes the driver for the investment as sustainability. And when that came about, there were some thematic areas taken in the umbrella of climate change, which included sustainable land use management and renewable energy and sustainable mobility in terms of transportation, and of course biodiversity. And if you look at that core, then the bonds were getting that kind of an intent that we are doing something good for the planet Earth, and we are bringing in financial flows to make these sustainability related interests happen into key sectors like energy and land management and forests in particular, and also of course talking about infrastructure. A quick historical that from that 2008 concept, you see that when the first green bond came about, you find that the other financing institutions, notably IFC, which is a part of the World Bank Group, and then joined by the banks in the European region, and also in the East, the Southeast Asia, by the Asian Development Bank, you find these taken lead in the issue of the green bonds, and then you find that trend happening also in other private sector financing institutions. Today, as you know, in India, we had just a couple of weeks back, and now it's out that CLP has mobilized, it is the power company, 600 crores of rupees in green bonds, and before that you had Yes Bank, who raised 1,000 crore of the green bonds. First one on CLP focusing on renewable energy, another one on the green infrastructure. We still don't see that trend globally also, that moved so much in terms of stakes to biodiversity. And I think I'll pause here and just make now the points which are important that we take up in the workshop, is that whole issue of the way we would look at biodiversity as an asset. And for the investors, when we are committing a fixed income, how do we manage and raise the quality of that asset becomes very important. So how do we use metrics to assess that asset as it is today? How do we monitor and report to know about how this asset is getting managed? How do we, in the case of forests particularly, adapt to even the impact of the climate change, because there's a risk proposition. If we want to draw ecosystem services, payments we form, revenues, how do we provide access? How do we control? For example, if there's a pharma industry interested to invest into green bonds for biodiversity, may be interested to extract from the forests and the forest produce for their interests to formulate their products, and how do we then from the policy side allow such extraction of resources to ensure that the asset is providing income so that you meet the committed fixed income return to the bond investors. So there are issues going to be in the assessment, in the management and reporting, and in terms of policy mechanisms, in terms of how do we let the investor access the assets of the natural resources. And here we are not talking about abundance, we are talking about diversity. So we got both abundance and diversity in front of us, and that makes it really challenging. So you do see, therefore, that when it comes to renewable energy or green infrastructure, it is easier to visualize the rate of returns for the investor under the green bonds, but it is not so easy when it comes to investing specifically for the protection and enhancement of biodiversity. So I think in the discussion sessions, we may like to dwell upon some of these questions which can be in some sense barriers for having investment flows for this very specific area of biodiversity. So I'll stop here, Mr. Chairman, and then take questions, or maybe in the work groups get into more nitty-gritties and details. Thank you.